Hey guys, and welcome to Diabetic 365. And today we have a very special guest from Canada. He's Jason, and he has been diabetic from past 29 years. And he recently, he had the islet transplantation few years back. So he's going to share us all the stories about before and after having the islet transplantation. So welcome to the show, Jason.
Thanks, PJ. Happy to be here.
So before going into your islet transplantation, I want to step back when you were a kid, when your numbers were good and your diabetes is right on track. So tell us first, when were you first diagnosed, and do you remember any kind of stories at that time?
Yeah, I was diagnosed March 3rd, 1983. And I was 11, and I pretty much remember everything about it. It was a pretty massive moment in your life, and you can, for whatever reason, a lot of it is really stuck in my head. So, I was really sick with the classic symptoms. I was peeing a lot, I was drinking a lot, I was losing a lot of weight. I was probably like maybe 5'6" at the time, and I weighed 66 pounds when I went into the hospital, which is really, maybe about 30 or 40 pounds underweight for an 11-year-old kid. And, diabetes wasn't in the news as much as it is today back then. So it really took a long time for us to really realize what was going on. And I can remember I was playing a game with my mom, and the doctor called, and they're like, well, you better get him to the hospital right away. He has diabetes, and, his blood sugar is really high, and we need to get him in right away. So off we went, and here we are.
So as a kid, your numbers were very good because your parents are taking care of you, and you didn't have any issues. But once you stepped out and living on your own, so that's when all these complications crept in. And tell us what kind of lifestyle changes that made your diabetes worse at that time.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest problem was, I wasn't maybe fully equipped to take care of it all by myself. And I like to tell people I had two things going against me. I was young and I was male, and therefore I felt like I was invincible or indestructible, and, you can do no wrong. So I thought I could tell when my sugars were high, and I thought I could tell when my sugars were low, and you can at first. So I wouldn't test my blood sugar, and I'd just sort of adjust based on how I felt. But over time, you start losing that ability to tell how high you are or how low you are. So, I hate to admit it, but I've gone for, in my early 20s, I went for over 2 years without testing my sugar at all.
So, dumbest thing to do when you have diabetes without testing for 2 years, which is pretty long. But how did you still maintain and cope up with the disease?
Yeah, I think at that point in my life, I just ignored it. I really just ignored it. I always had my insulin, sort of that random amount based on how I felt. So, I took my 2 or 3 shots a day or whatever it was. And, but for the rest of it, I just wanted to have fun, work, be with my friends, do the stuff that anyone wants to do. So I really didn't do myself any favors there, and I really got into a lot of trouble because of it. When you're diagnosed with diabetes, they often tell you that if you don't take care of your diabetes within 15 to 20 years, you're going to end up with the long-term complications. And sure enough, when I hit my 15-year mark at about 26, that's when I started noticing the complications.
So what kind of complications? I know you said before, like the retinopathy, the neuropathy, the ED problem. So how did you approach to all these complications later?
Right. Well, the first one that I did notice was the erectile dysfunction, and I think that's a big deal for any man, but especially at 26, it was huge. So that got me back to see my doctor pretty quick. And then I'm back to the clinic and working with the nurses and whatnot. So you're trying to figure out, well, where are you at that time? And so they're looking at everything, and it's like, okay, well, you have this problem. Oh, look, you have some retinopathy in the back of your eyes. You have some neuropathy in your feet. So you're sort of, it's kind of like, it was like being punched with every single thing that happened. It was like getting punched again. So, it's like, you're trying to take care of yourself, but oh, you have this to deal with, and you're trying again, and you have this to take care of again. So it was a really rough time at that point, and
Yeah.
it's
It's kind of a spiral effect, one by one.
Yeah, it was definitely a downward spiral at that time.
Hmm. So, when did you hear about this islet transplantation? Who told you about this, and how did you come to know about this?
Well, living in Edmonton, which is the University of Alberta Hospital is a really great diabetes research hospital. It has been for a long time. I was always sort of aware of it, and in 1999, when they came out with their article in the New England Journal of Medicine, I think anyone who had diabetes at that time, it was on their radar. And I was living in Jasper, Alberta, in the mountains, and working out there. And my mom, she sent me a clipping from the newspaper, and she wrote on top, she's like, "Jason, wouldn't it be nice if one day you could have this?" And I wish I had kept that, because that'd be so cool to have that still. But I guess she must have had a premonition, or must have known somehow. But at first I never thought that I was that sick where it might not be available for me. But as time sort of went on, and I'm working with my doctors, and my diabetes was really brittle, like the sugars up and down all the time. So one day, he just suggested to me, he's like, "You know what, Jason, I think you might be a good candidate for the islet transplant." He said, "Do you mind if I talk to my colleagues about it?" Because he was in the hospital, and his colleagues worked at that hospital, so he knew them. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, "Yeah, okay, go ahead and talk to them, and let me know what they say in 2 weeks when I come back." And when I came back, he said, he's like, "Yeah, based on what I've told them, they think that you might be a good candidate, and they encourage you to apply to the program." So I called them, and I got the application package, and I filled it out, and it was like 29 pages or something like that. And I started doing all the tests, and obviously I've had a transplant, or I wouldn't be talking to you about that. But it just really, I guess it just really worked out for me. I'm very, very lucky that way, for sure.
So tell us the kind of life now after islet transplantation. What kind of major changes that you saw after having this transplantation?
Everything has changed. You could use any cliche that you want about your life turning around completely, and they all apply. After my first procedure, I started dating my now wife. Maybe 2 weeks after that, I was off insulin maybe 3 or 4 months after, and that's a pretty big deal. People with diabetes, you have that part of your brain that's always kind of monitoring, how are my sugars? Do I feel good? Do I feel bad? Do I go down? Do I have to test? How many carbs do I have to eat? And I don't really have to do any of that anymore. So, I'm much more at ease. I used to not be able to feel my low blood sugars, and I can tell you that I can now feel my low blood sugars, and I've only had maybe 6 or 7 in the past 6 years, which is absolutely amazing. And they're usually for some crazy reason, like I've exercised way too much, or I didn't quite eat enough for whatever activity level I was doing. And it's never really, really low. Like it's maybe like 3.5 or 3.6. So for you guys, that's times 18. So 70 or 75, kind of right in that range. So low, but not too bad.
Okay. So from what you say, from what you're saying, the thing that I can understand is your diabetes is not completely gone, but the only thing is when you had the islets transplantation, you had a better insulin production in your body. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's close. I guess I technically don't have diabetes anymore. I don't have to take any insulin. Mm-hmm. So I'm very lucky that way. I'm still insulin independent. I don't really have to watch what I eat very much, although I sort of do. I mean, it's just a habit that you get into over your life. Mm-hmm. I'll be the first one to say how fortunate I really, really am. And
but,
I still.
But you said you still sometimes feel the lows or the highs.
Yeah, I've regained that ability to feel what it is to be low or what it is to be high, because my sugars have been stable for so long. So your body relearns what it is when you feel out of range. So, you know, so I average one low a year, which is amazing, and that might even be like the same as a non-diabetic person, just because you exercise too much or you eat too little or whatever it is. So there's no more dangerous lows. There's no more, you know, passing out and waking up in the hospital or any of those crazy things anymore.
Exactly. Is it? So, is it like, is this kind of available to everyone, or do they have to meet some kind of requirements in their body for you to undergo transplantation?
Okay, so there's a few things surrounding it. In Canada, it's much more recognized up here, and actually in Alberta, where Edmonton is, it's recognized as a standard of care. So they'll do it for anyone who qualifies. So what you need to have in order to qualify is some sort of hypoglycemic unawareness, so you can't really feel your lows, and you have to, you know, I think you have to have a few low blood sugars where you need assistance from someone else, and then, you know, despite your best efforts, your diabetes is really hard to deal with, and those are really the only things that they're looking for. In the United States, it's a little bit different because it hasn't gained approval from the FDA. So there's a whole bunch of centers around the states that are doing them, but they're all doing like small-scale studies. So, say versions of the Edmonton protocol. So it's a little bit more like they only take like maybe 50 or 60 patients, and it's a lot more restrictive than it is up here.
Oh, okay. So after you had the transplantation, one quite interesting question is, how long did your body take to adjust to come to normal again?
Right away, immediately.
Immediately?
Right as soon as the islets are transplanted, they start working. So right after the procedure, they take you back up and they do finger pokes every 15 minutes just to make sure that your sugars don't fall too low, because you still have a little bit of insulin from the IVs on board. So they want to make sure that the islets don't work too well at first. So the islets they're released into your liver, and they grow their own blood supply, and they just, I guess, basically hang out in the liver, and they monitor my sugars, and they're doing a wonderful job.
Oh, it's as simple as that.
Yeah. Well, not quite that simple, but it's pretty fabulous.
So it's kind of a second life or a rebirth to you. So how do you feel now?
I feel fabulous. I'm probably healthier than I've ever been in my adult life. I'm way more active than I ever used to be. You know, my diabetes was pretty bad before, and you know, with the complications, I could maybe leave my house one day a week, and now I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, and you know, I don't hardly think about it at all anymore.
So last but one question is, so what is your advice to the diabetic community out there?
I would say don't do what I did. You know, do your best to take care of your diabetes as best as you can. You know, people are working really hard on more therapies and more cures, and I don't know what it's going to be, but it's up to you to be as healthy as you can possibly be until it's your turn to have something as wonderful as what I've had.
So your final question is, some things you learned the hard way in this 28 or 29 years of your diabetes life.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, for sharing your fabulous story to the whole community, whole diabetic community, and thank you so much. You have a nice day.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good night, Jason. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.